With the Coast Guard being here, I know everybody has a lot of questions about the certificates of inspection and some of the requirements that you go through for the charter industry, because remember, gentlemen, this is specific just to charter. So we were curious if you could tell us a little bit about, what the procedure is for requesting a certificate of inspection, and what's the rights that the U.S. flag vessels need to ask for.
Absolutely. Just to kind of formalize the introduction, I am Benjamin Mercado. I've been doing inspections for about 16 years now. I do delve in the investigations world as well. Jesus?
Good morning to all. Jesus Parada. As seen on the screen, I did 29 years of active duty, and I'm a Coast Guard civilian working a little bit over a year. So a little bit over 30 years of Coast Guard experience, primarily the last 8 being in Marine safety.
My name is J.D. Santiago. I've been doing inspections for over 5 years, and I just recently transferred to investigations.
Welcome. Thanks, you guys. Yeah, we're happy you're here.
To answer your question, so chartering, obviously there are 2 areas where we kind of focus our standards and regulations or policies regarding chartering. We have what's called a domestic aspect, which is all your U.S. flagged yachts and vessels, and we also have foreign flag, port state control yacht requirements and standards that have to be met. So if we can hone in on which one you'd like to discuss, whether it be foreign flag yachts or...
Let's start there.
Okay. Foreign flag yachts. So the Coast Guard has for a long time conducted what's considered port state control examinations of all foreign vessels that come into the United States under a commercial service. Last year around this time, our headquarters re-emphasized the need and the purpose to conduct port state control examinations in this specific area, since the volume of yachts to South Florida is one of the higher entry points anywhere in the U.S. next to San Diego. Last year we went out. I don't know if most of you brokers dealt with us, but what we started to find last year, these commercial contract charters were having problems specifically understanding the U.S. regulation and laws when it comes to meeting certain criteria once reporting in and once in the United States. One, we found that a lot of vessels were non-compliant with what's considered certificates of financial responsibilities, what we call a COFR, the acronym. Back in 1990s, after the Exxon spill, foreign vessels were required to have some surety bond meeting a certain dollar amount prior to entering the United States should an oil spill or some environmental disaster occurred. Well, yachts were not exempted from this particular requirement, and what we were finding is the first order of business is whether or not they have the certificate of financial responsibility, only because of the fact that if they do not, they're not even allowed in the United States. Secondly, what we were also finding was another requirement based from OPA 90, the Exxon Valdez spill, was what we consider a non-tank vessel response plan. Both of these issues required vessels to have these items prior to entering, and as a result, we were turning away a lot of yachts from actually entering U.S. waters. So prior to chartering or getting into the business commercial side for chartering, vessels weren't even allowed into the United States as a result of this. There are certain criteria that needed to be met as well. We look at foreign yachts in three capacities. One is foreign flag yachts engaged in trade carrying more than 12 passengers. Foreign flag yachts engaged in trade carrying 12 or fewer passengers. And then lastly, foreign flag yachts not engaged in trade carrying non-paying passengers. And this is a big deal because this is what separates what we consider recreational usage versus your commercial trade as per the documentation of certification through whatever flag the yacht may be flying under or sailing under. So back in December, we had this big outreach, especially here in Fort Lauderdale, to include all the requirements that need to be met prior to yachts coming in. It set our standard for conducting these exams, which are not as intense as it would be for, say, an oil ship or an oil tank ship, a cruise ship, a container ship. They have more stringent requirements and standards, but under the yacht, it was kind of more of looking into them having the standards required under the yacht code from the particular nation under which they're sailing under. So we would emphasize if the safety standards for life-saving were met, some of the requirements for pollution in the U.S. were met, then they were pretty much a go. It's not. It's kind of an oversight, not as stringent as your normal bigger types of ships, cargo ships, but nonetheless, we were finding that vessels were not prepared and thus not allowing them to operate here in the United States. Give me a second to pause. I'm kind of rushing here through my head, but it was kind of like just walk in.
We did kind of bum rush you in here, didn't we? I'm sorry
It's
about
catching
that.
up now,
Like,
so.
hey, you guys are here. Great. Sorry about that.
It's all right. I do see. I have a question here.
Is there a certain size percentage that you look at?
Yes, ma'am, there is actually. And it goes back to these certain criteria that I mentioned here. So I brought these forms. Anyone who needs to be more informed on what the situation, what the requirements are, we have them here along with the website that's very informative and it'll give you answers to your questions. But for foreign flag yachts engaged in trade, okay, specifically more than 12 passengers, it doesn't matter. It's all gross tons. So in this case, it's the carrying of passengers, more than 12. It doesn't matter about gross tonnage or size. If you're carrying more than 12, then you have to be examined by the Coast Guard.
How frequently?
That's a good question as well. So depending on your size, gross tonnage-wise, will determine whether it's every 2 years or perhaps if you're a smaller size, every 3 years. So although the applicability for the exam is passenger count, the frequency by which they're conducted is by gross tonnage.
And so what's the every 2-year gross tonnage
It's
requirement?
300.
300 gross
Anything
tons or above?
300, I'm sorry. Anything below 300 is every 3 years. Anything above that would be every 2 years.
Every 2 years? Okay, cool.
And obviously, the last requirement: foreign flag yachts not engaged in trade, non-paying guests, or valid bareboat charters. This is where it gets a little more detailed in size, gross tonnage. So if you have a vessel that's 500 or more gross tons, you're exempt from SOLAS, but you may have some requirements under U.S. regs to be inspected. 300 or more, but less than 500 gross tons, you're still exempt from SOLAS requirements. If I'm going off on an acronym, which you don't understand, please raise your hand so I can clarify what it is. SOLAS is Survival of Life at Sea. It's the International Maritime Organization's standard by which all international vessels sail. It's the equivalency of, the IMO is the equivalency of the UN, but obviously for maritime purposes. So if your vessel is required to have SOLAS standard, then you have to meet what we consider to be the highest standards in maritime safety. So going back, 100 or more, but less than 300 gross tons, again, you're exempt from SOLAS. Less than 100 gross tons, you're exempt from SOLAS, but you have to still comply with U.S. regulations. So despite not having paying customers or paying passengers, you don't have to meet the international standards as the other ones would, but you still have to meet some of the U.S. domestic standards for inspections. So to answer her question, it's a little more complicated or complex than just saying yes or no. It is dependent on gross tonnage. It's also dependent on passenger count. And obviously, if you need a little more detail, afterwards, I can definitely answer them for you.
How would you suggest that someone go about requesting the inspection?
Okay, so there is a responsibility by owners and operators of foreign flag yachts that are 300 gross tons or above to report their arrival into the U.S. And this is separate from customs, okay? This is a Coast Guard requirement that through the ship's arrival notification system, you submit your arrival to the U.S. 96 hours before arriving. And what happens is, if we do have a history of the vessel in our system, we're able to vet it. And through our matrixing program, we're able to assess points. Based on the point system that is totaled, or the summation of these points, will determine what type of exam you have. If the vessel's new to the U.S. and we have no history, no record, she will get examined. There's no question about it. So the having to report it, or how do you request it, should go through the arrival process. By law, you have to report it. Through our matrixing program or system, we'll determine whether or not your vessel needs an exam. And if we do assess it and there isn't a need for an exam, we will go ahead and reach out to whoever the point of contact is and kind of give them the heads up. Hey, your vessel's scored out this much. We will be conducting a port state control examination depending on the criteria, either at sea, at the docks, and it'll all be determined once our score dictates what type of exam it is. So if somehow you're requesting it and you're here, you violated a law right off the bat because it was never reported, which is not a good thing. So it can lead to an enforcement aspect, which is what we don't want. So I think headquarters back last year around this time, why they wanted to reemphasize the importance of these exams is so that they are reporting their arrivals to the U.S. under the requirements of U.S. regulations, the whole 96-hour arrival time. And if you are calling, hey, we need an exam, and it was never reported, then it's just a red flag for us. Okay, well, here's a ship how did it come into the U.S. without reporting? So it's a problem. So that grace period has come and gone. So I would advise, if you have yachts that meet these criteria, that need port state control exams, please do not allow the fact that you may have not reported the vessel coming in to deter from the actual examination, because then it's just compounding. It wasn't reported, and then you're not inspected, which is a bigger egregious act in the way we look at things. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any exception to that, such as safe harbor, say a hurricane is approaching, or if there's a problem with the yacht, it's partially disabled or anything? So
Force
are there
majeure.
exceptions to that?
There is. Force majeure, you have to notify, obviously, what we call the local captain of the port. And in our area, quote me, please correct me if I'm wrong, we're pretty much from Miami Beach all the way up to just below Melbourne. So we have a pretty big swath of area we
A
cover.
little north of Key Largo up.
Okay.
Okay, and would there be a period of time that they would be allowed in and then would have to take appropriate action?
Right, so you would call the local captain of the port, the Coast Guard. You let them know your situation. They grant you permission to enter port, but obviously that comes with the stipulation that we know who's on board, where are you going, what type of measures are you going to take to mitigate any potential harm to the environment should a hurricane come through. And God forbid, like Matthew, you had a category 4, which can cause some significant damage. So they will not deny you entry for hurricane purposes. Same thing with mechanical issues or some issue regarding a vessel, but there are questions that will need to be answered before the captain of the port deems the vessel safe to enter. But you will not be denied, no.
Thank you.
We have a question over here, but I have a question really quick. So you were mentioning that that's the procedure for foreign flagged yachts. What about U.S. flagged yachts?
U.S. flagged yachts it's obviously they're U.S. flagged. So the need to know who they are is not, and I don't, I guess for the lack of a better word today, I'll just go, is not as
Urgent?
urgent to know who they are. Usually U.S. ships are already documented. You get your certificate of documentation through the Coast Guard. So a system already exists. There's a background. There's data. We know what it is, when it was built, who owns it. So pertinent information for safety and security reasons we should have already. And U.S. ships normally still have to report based on the gross tonnage again. Different ports, but usually for yachts, especially recreational, it's not as, it's kind of more lenient.
Especially if you're traveling foreign. So your U.S. flag vessel, you're traveling foreign, you're re-entering the U.S., you need to notify. Also to keep in mind that if you're operating within the captain report zone, then you're a frequent flyer, as we call it. So once you report and you're in a captain report zone, then it's a non-issue. So when you leave the captain report zone and you travel foreign, which is very easily in our area because people do obviously enjoy going to our neighboring nations. So you have to make sure that you're in compliance with the notice of arrival rule. Some of these ports are not 96 hours from, depending on the speed of the vessel, from the U.S. ports. So you have to also ensure that you're doing it at least, I think it's 24 hours prior to arrival, but prior to departure. So these rules get pretty sticky, and if you're in violation of a notice of arrival, then you're going to be subject to civil penalties for not notifying. And technically, you can also even be, removed from the port for not having these folks vetted, the vessel vetted. So it becomes more of a logistical nightmare for you folks who are in the business of giving people pleasures and fun and having to be expelled from the port and things of that nature. So.
Okay, we had a question right over here. Did you guys bring a microphone?
Foreign flag vessel less than 300 gross ton. What is the time frame that they need to report?
It's depending on location, like Mr. Parada here said. U.S. regulations, if you go, and if, I'm going to assume everyone knows what regs we're talking about, but 33 USC or CFR 160 is specific to notification, and it has to do with how far out the vessel's located. From the Bahamas to the U.S., it's not going to take you 24 hours, or it's not going to take you 96 hours. So it depends on how far the voyage is from where that vessel's departing and arriving in the United States.
Is that like a safe time zone that you would say?
The magic number is if the voyage is less than 24 hours to 12 hours, make the notification 24 hours beforehand or before departing the foreign port. But if it's greater than 24 hours, then the 96-hour rule applies. And that's obviously that's 4 days. And it's like this so that not just the Coast Guard has enough time to properly vet, but the SAN system, ship arrival notification, it's also a system that Customs, Immigration, quite a few federal agencies use to do their own vetting as well. So obviously with the way the government is kind of slow with things, 4 days is sometimes not enough.
Daphne, you have a question?
I do. A lot of times we get the request for more than 12, and I'm just curious, it may be a two-part question, but the first part would be for a U.S. flag vessel, is it possible to ask for a certificate of inspection and get that approved if they pass, and what is the process?
Okay, so beyond 12, the 12 passenger rule, it's sometimes people don't really understand how that actually works. 12 passengers is actually, it's the charterer doesn't count. So it's 12 passengers beyond the charterer. Charterer is only one person. If you want to go beyond the 12, then your vessel has to be certificated. And to do that, you actually have to apply for a certificate of inspection. And there's a process, obviously, that you make those the applications, and there's we have to review the plans of the vessel, we have to do stability, there's a lot of things, regardless of how big the vessel may be. Once you start doing the certificate of inspection, then railings, life-saving, a lot of things change once you go commercial. Even sometimes the aspect of the way the vessel even looks might even change based on some of the requirements for safety. So the proper thing is contact your local captain report zone, and under that is the Officer of Marine Inspections, and then you go ahead and do your application, and we'll send you the appropriate documentation based on the size of the vessel and what's going to be needed.
I would add to that that it is a very complicated, complex process. If you are not already a certificated vessel, the process in itself is not overnight. It doesn't take a week. It takes months. So if you're planning on carrying more than 12 passengers and the vessel has to be certificated, or what we call a COI, Certificate of Inspection, understand it takes planning.
Is that even if it's at the dock? Just at the dock?
I would tell you,
Yes.
the normal process usually begins at the construction phase. So if your vessel has already been constructed and it's never been certificated and you want to engage in the inspection program, it's complicated. It takes a while. It is not an overnight process by no means.
So the second part of the question then is, when it comes to a foreign vessel, if that foreign vessel has documentation from their flag state that actually may prove those safety requirements that you would have had for a U.S. flag vessel, is it possible in conjunction with that flag state to get the same thing?
Right. It's the same applicability, only that we accept the flag state of the vessel, because we've assumed that they've taken care of it by their methods and standards. So the only difference would be with a vessel that carries 12 or more passengers, now you start getting into SOLAS, your international standard, and now you start getting into certificate, which is what we considered Passenger Safety Security Certificate. And it's the same certificate that these cruise ships get, which is that's another arduous process as well. Because now you have flag involved, you have your class society doing their thing, plus you have your port state control nations that also get involved. So they're both very complicated. And if the idea is to engage in commercial service with 12 or more passengers, it's very complicated.
It's not impossible.
It's not impossible, right?
Don't get me wrong. It can be done, but it's not something that you just submit a permit because we're having a venue that night and we're having 40
Right.
guests. You don't submit a one-day permit and the Coast Guard gives you a carte blank. Here, sure, go ahead, have your dinner party that night. It doesn't work that way.
No, it takes a long time.
Any other questions? I have a couple of questions in case you guys don't. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nicole. Didn't see. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just want to go back to one more thing on the ENOA, or the Notice of Arrival,
Yes.
just so everybody knows, because we work with it a lot. Really, the only country that's pretty much exempt from the 96-hour is the Bahamas at 24 hours
Right.
at this point in time. And then what everybody needs to also understand is that it's like a trickle-down theory. So if you don't do your ENOA properly and have that done, when you first get here to do your call-in or your Customs Immigration Coast Guard call-in, it won't allow you to make that call-in if you haven't done your ENOA, which won't give you the number that you then need at immigration. So it's a process that you have to start with. And also, as we start to do more and more charters up the East Coast, what people have to realize is that, like they said, we're only in a region that goes up to
Just below Melbourne.
Yeah, just below Melbourne. So for a foreign flag vessel who's going to work its way up the East Coast, they may hit 4, 5, 6 different zones, and you have to file, once again, an ENOA for each one of those zones. So keep that in mind.
Nicole?
With the yachts that are denied a cruising permit but are here, what's the time for the permission to proceed? When a captain calls in and says, I want to move from Fort Lauderdale to Key West or back, how much? I know it's 96 hours for notice of
Foreign
arrival,
flag?
but if they're here, they're a U.S. hull, foreign flagged, but they're not on a cruising permit, and the owner wants to use the boat and go from point A to point B.
So
You're talking about the customs?
Yeah, it's
permit?
a customs, it's different. That's the permission to proceed comes through customs.
Right.
And the cruising licenses come through customs. So two different departments.
But I
But
would
from
tell
the
you-
Coast Guard,
Right. I would tell you what the
Since-
gentleman just mentioned here. Key West is a different zone.
okay.
So if you're leaving Miami,
say you go from Fort Lauderdale to Palm Beach,
you're
but,
still in our zone.
but you don't have a cruising permit. So the permission to proceed is completely customs, not Coast Guard?
Right.
Okay.
Sorry. Let me ask you a question. It's kind of timely because everybody's excited about Cuba. What do the requirements kind of state right now with regards to boats coming back to the U.S. from Cuba?
U.S., you still have to seek permission under recreational. Foreign flag, you're kind of, you're not, we're not limiting any foreign flag from taking any voyages outside of the U.S. It's out of our authority and jurisdiction to do so. Under recreational, U.S. documented, U.S. flag, you have to seek a permit for recreational.
What is that, a 33 permit?
That is, and you know, I'm
33,
sorry I don't have the
13 or
exact.
something like that, yeah, okay.
It is, and basically it's our district office that takes those requests, and it has to be submitted within a 30-day window prior to the trip, and it sets there what the itinerary is, because you may go to Cuba, decide to go to Jamaica, and so on and so forth. So what they want to know is when you're leaving and when you're returning. And then obviously it's not that complicated of a process. You get your permit. If you exceed the timeline, then they start to worry. It's like, well, you had this window, and you're kind of having to report it, but not do the same measures as you would for an ENOA. It's still a permit process for recreational vessels. We're assuming here shortly, it's pretty soon it's just going to be open. Obviously, you got some of the embargoes, like last week, got lifted for some of the commerce, but as of right now, the Coast Guard still requires permits.
Okay, and you said it's 30 days before the trip that they
Right.
need to file for that permit. How long does it take you guys to turn it around?
I don't work there. I'd love to answer it. It's a quick
No tough
turnaround,
questions,
but
yeah. Quickly.
as
So I
best as
see.
they can get it out.
So, quick question, what is the USCG position on bareboat charter agreements as a whole?
This is our expert right here.
Hold on. I'll retract that statement. All right, so bareboat charters that's something that obviously it's a hot topic. You know what's bareboat, what's not bareboat. The bottom line is that this is an old document. This is Passenger Vessel Safety Act of 1994, and the Coast Guard went ahead and put out the circular. And the bottom line is that you have the seven important elements of that, which is obviously, the charter must have an option of selecting the crew. That's always probably one of the hardest points that we run into. It's people require the services, the boat and the crew is already selected by the brokers or the boat owners at times. And then people show up, they're having a good time, the Coast Guard boards them, and then sure enough, crew selection was never implied in the original process to acquire the services. The word itself, bareboat charter, says it as such. It's a boat, bare, and then anybody who is working, the food, everything has to be obviously provided by the person, the charterer, and he can have 12 guests. So you have to make sure that these elements, like once again, the crew selection is done, the master and the crew are paid by the charterer. So when you do the breakdown of payment, indirectly, that money has to be obviously by the charterer, or it can't be the vessel owner or the broker already have that already covered. All full fuel, as I said, provided by the charterer. Port fees, anything that has to do with pilotage, anything has to be obviously covered by that person. Insurance has to be covered by the charterer. And it has to be very clear that the charterer has ownership of that vessel during that time period. That has to be writtenly implied in that contract. And by that, it also allows the charterer to fire the crew, even if necessary. Obviously, the vessel has clause that he needs a bona fide crew, captain's license in most cases for insurance purposes and such. So it's not like the guy can just go rogue and fire everybody and starts driving away with the yacht. That's not what it's made. It's made so that at least he feels like there's some kind of ownership. With that being said, the broker can't be on board, the actual owner can't be part of the crew, because then transfer ownership would never be implied. And another thing too is that they have to make sure that they do surveys. So damage surveys prior to the trip and post-trip. And some of these things, like I said, these are the basic elements that needs to be covered in there. We're finding a lot of heartache with the crew selection process. We understand that that's sometimes complex because you may have a roster of masters available for that vessel, and then sometimes owners only allow certain captains to operate their vessels because they're on their policies, or they have enough trust in those captains particularly, and maybe that captain's not even available coinciding with the day of the voyage. So that becomes very complex. What I recommend is always have at least, at a minimum 3 captains. When the people are making the arrangements, if you can have like a profile for these captains, and have the people choose. Maybe these people don't care. They may say, you know what, you choose for me, you know better. But at least you give them the opportunity to choose. Maybe they want somebody's last name Mercado because maybe there are people that'd rather have a Spanish-speaking captain. That could be an option, So it could be anything, but at least have them have the chance. You don't want to get boarded by the Coast Guard. We're going to ask the questions. The people are going to be honest because they're going to be honest. Why lie about it? No, when we showed up, these people were already on the boat. They got the nice polo shirts. Obviously, they must be the crew. It's a done deal. Well, that's not the way it works. So don't get yourself caught up in that situation because you will be terminated. Okay, we're going to bring you back to the closest port of safe haven, and the people have to be disembarked, and basically it's going to really cause a lot of headaches for the people that are trying to enjoy themselves, and you will be subject to civil penalties.
So
Go ahead, Daphne. It's okay.
Would it help or could we as an industry, when it comes to the bareboating situation, potentially have something that goes along with the agreements that we use, which are standardized for the most part, I think, most of us agree, that maybe shows, whether it's an addendum or a checklist, that shows affidavit with the signature of this owner or transfer of ownership that he's done the survey, that he has agreed to have hired this crew and was offered other crew, and that he does, have his name on the insurance policy, and that's proven. I mean, other than every single time coming across a bareboat situation and not knowing what that captain might be asked for to prove all of this, or that owner might be asked for to prove all of this.
Right, and I recommend it. I think it should be the standard. So I mean, if you have these elements part of your contract or an amendment to it, but you also have to brief that captain. Right. Because what happens is that maybe the captain doesn't know that he was selected for that day. Right. So he may get boarded and not know. So the bottom line is that some of these things, very rare that you're going to have somebody at the last minute say, I want that yacht. So there's some prep time. So you offer those names up. Once you choose your captain, because they are actually available, and you tell, hey, you were selected, based on the roster. Those captains should know they're on a roster. Most of them do. It's no surprise to them that they're going to be called because they're on some kind of roster. But they may be working on other boats because some of these captains freelance and they bounce around.
And about the survey, the before and after survey, can that be as basic as a walkthrough that they initial and sign off on and say, I did this on this date and I did this on that?
That's fine. That is fine. As long as the intent. I don't need to go is the pantry, the hall, the living room, the TV, the remote was there. It doesn't have to be something that intense, but at least whether there's a survey and everything was found satisfactory prior to and post-trip.
Okay. Can that just be signed by the captain and the beneficial owner at beginning and end?
No, that needs to be signed by the charterer. Yes, that's correct. The charterer has to acknowledge the fact.
It looks like we have a couple more questions out here. Go ahead. Iona?
First of all, good morning. Thank you for coming. We know you're all very busy. I just wanted to get clarification on something because you mentioned earlier, and this is in regards to the policy letter that went out last year. There's a few sections, and the first sections, you mentioned foreign flag yachts engaged in trade, but technically, based on the Jones Act and the Passenger Services Act, technically shouldn't all foreign flag yachts come in as private and airborne charter?
Yes and no. It's dependent on the documentation or the certification by which the administration applies to them. Like in the United States, usually our certificate of documentation will tell you what kind of service it is. It'll say recreational or say coastwise or what have you. Marshall Islands will give the option of both. You'll look at the certificate of documentation, it'll say recreational, and then also, and don't quote me on the top of it, but limited passengers, I forget the exact title of it. Okay. Oh, good.
Pop quiz.
Then you know what I'm talking about. The limited charter.
To the actual registration.
Correct. Because we look at the registration, and Marshall Islands will dictate for us what type of vessel it is, correct?
Sure. Well, actually, so when most vessels, I would say all foreign flag yachts, when they come into the U.S., they actually come in on the private certificate registry because they would like to get a cruising permit. They're not to be engaged in commercial activity while they're in the U.S. because of the Jones Act and because of the Passenger Services Act. So we don't actually tell them that they can charter in the U.S. What we do tell them is what's acceptable in the U.S. would be their charter because, you know, that's done. They shouldn't be involved in commercial activity. Is that correct?
That's true. And it's based on an honor system, actually, to be honest with you, when they're reporting in through the notice of arrival process. Like your passengers, are they paying customers? Are they commercial? Or is it the owner with family? So it's kind of left up to like, you know, the integrity of the ownership or who's traveling on board. And there's no way for us to determine that. We'll go out and do an exam and we're able to vet a little more or scrutinize a little more accurately, like who was on board and whether or not they were paying customers. But through the arrival process, you know, you're absolutely right.
Any other questions? I thought I saw a couple more hands. We have just about 4 more minutes, so kind of.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good morning. My question is in regards to clarification of that 12 passenger comment that you made earlier. I think we were talking about foreign flag commercial. And it was stated, I believe, that the charter was not included in the 12 passenger count. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Does the same apply for the bareboat contract?
That's correct. So
Thank you.
because the charterer is practically the owner at that time, and 12 passengers are his guests. So it's actually 12 plus 1.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else? We have time for maybe one more. We will have a break right after this, I believe, right? So if you guys would hang around and answer some more
absolutely.
questions if it's individually. But do we have anybody else that has something they'd like to ask in the forum? Okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to get clarification on the crew selection. Is it only the captain that needs to be selected or all the crew?
The biggest problem is the captain. Crew, it's not a problem.
We hear you.
And because we don't really interview the crew per se, we're assuming that they have responsibilities as to doing safety-sensitive positions, assisting passengers during emergency situations, handling lines, things of that nature. But when we say crew, it does also include them. So technically, yes. But where we really pinpoint is on the captain. Because, well, like I said, we get these lists. We validate these lists. And believe it or not, it's not the captains that are actually available, it's not a very big list. And we know who they actually work for, if they're still active or not. So we're embedded, and some of these people, you know, they'll tell us, no, this guy doesn't work for us. He works, you know, so we constantly maintain those lists, and we know for a fact, and we validate them. If we see that something's not adding up, we'll go ahead and validate, and we'll contact this captain. And if he's a U.S. licensed mariner, and we contact him, and he's trying to either deny the fact, or, I mean, he's subject to, you know, suspension revocation. So his license is on the line. So these people will hopefully, you know, take the matter pretty serious, and they'll, you know, talk to us openly, and it says, no, I was never contacted for this trip. Or they might say, you know what, I was contacted, but I was busy, or I was off, you know, and at least we know that the attempt is there. It's what it boils down to, really. You have to make a conscious effort to allow people to choose the captain and their crew, so that at least they have true ownership. Because if not, then, once again, we're not in compliance with the Passenger Vessel Safety Act and the elements that it's needed within. So.
Awesome. Okay, so I know you have one more question really quick, and then we got to wrap it up.
Hi. If you have a U.S. registered vessel that's got a coast-wise commercial endorsement on it, you're restricted to 6. Correct. If you're using it also for pleasure, does the Coast Guard know to ask that question if you get pulled over?
Yes, we do. So the whole 6, commonly known as 6-pack, or uninspected passenger vessel, once again, we are going to, first of all, any boarding officer boards you, it should state what's the purpose of your voyage, and where you're going. All right, so once that's established, and they say, no, I'm with my family and friends, but once again, as law enforcement officers, we know if you're trying to circumvent the question, you know, when we know for a fact that normally doesn't meet a profile of a family trip. So if you're doing 6-pack operations, first things first, if you are under passengers for hire, you will require a licensed mariner. Minimum requirement will be operator of uninspected passenger vessel license, and you will be required to ensure that if they do have a crew member, that himself and that crew member is enrolled in a random drug program right off the bat. You have to make sure that that vessel, although it can be used as a recreational vessel, at the time this has passengers for hire, the life-saving changes. Now you need type 1 life jackets versus type 3 for recreational voyages. So you may be a boat owner who does enjoy going out fishing with your friends, and you have a Coast Guard data plate that says 12 passengers. That placard doesn't mean anything once you have passengers for hire. Then you're restricted by 6. Okay.
Perfect. All right, well, we're going to have to close off the questions for now, but they will hang out during the break. So if you have more questions for them, please feel free to approach them. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your very generous use of time. I know I personally love a man in a uniform, and we're super happy that you're here. So thank you very much.